Hi, we're gonna do chapter 3 now. So, yeah, give me a minute to get set up. I don't know why I pushed record so soon. Chapter 3 of The Bloodpines by Matt Bears. Alright, chapter 3. Common Lester didn't mind that his son wasn't going to the Bloodpines. Some folks require validation, some don't. It made Common proud that his son could discern between a true demonstration of manhood and a ridiculous display of empty tradition. The walk to the Bloodpines hadn't always been pointless. It had a purpose in the beginning. The boys left their homes together, frightened, anxious, unsure of their own strengths and abilities. But when they returned several days later, filthy, exhausted, hungry, and proudly carrying a freshly hewn bloodpine trunk, they knew something about themselves that they hadn't known before. It wasn't a task any of them could have managed alone. It required all of their strength and ingenuity to get the trunk home. Not only did they have a new appreciation for their own abilities, but they saw their peers in a new light as well. It wasn't only an individual rite of passage, but one that guaranteed that the community would continue to work and grow together. The bonds built during the Bloodpine Walk spawned friendships that lasted decades. But as the Bloodpines became more and more scarce, the significance of the rite faded until groups started returning empty-handed. As the years passed, the walk became a run, high honor being paid to the first boys to return. With no tree to carry back, there was no need to work together, and therefore no need to travel together. The walk became a contest, and many of the boys returned with injuries suffered at the hands of their peers. There were frequent accusations that some boys didn't make the full trip. Instead of strengthening the community, the walk was tearing it apart. Well, I'm going to let that sink in for a bit. Okay, that's good. Eventually, the town decided that the boys had to make the trip as a group, arriving at the watchtower together, so there could be no question about who had and who had not completed the journey. The return trip, however, remained a chaotic free-for-all. It all seemed very trite to Common, who had approached his own walk to the Bloodpines when he was 15, filled with hope and visions of glory and expectations that things would be different. He would know things he hadn't before. He would see the world differently, would have a clearer understanding of what was expected of him. Hope turned to disillusionment on the first night when Simon Downey's father rolled up to the first night campsite in his fancy wagon. Simon and several of the others quickly climbed up into the back of the wagon, and it disappeared into the night. The next night, they heard the wagon passing by them in the dark, heading back toward town. I want to take a moment here to explain that my timeline is a bit off. So if you want to dig real deep, yeah, there's a mistake in there. But we're just going to move on. Maybe in the second edition I'll fix it. I'm not going to fix it. Simon and his friends had been dropped off a few miles outside of town and made a triumphant return to the astonishment of the townsfolk who applauded the boys for their speed and the fact that they had stuck together, because what was the walk to the Bloodpines if not an exercise in community building? It got worse. When the remaining boys finally arrived at the watchtower, several boys decided they were done, and they sprinted back down the path toward town. Apart from Common, only 4 remained. Charlie Wheeler, Ample Sunner, and his cousin Joseph Blank, and of course, Abner Burnham. Where else would Abner be but standing triumphantly at the foot of the watchtower? He looked like a conqueror gazing up at a tower he was thinking of tearing down. Common knew in that single brief moment of victory that he had just stumbled upon the true purpose of the walk. It wasn't about the Bloodpines, and it wasn't about returning first. It was about completing the task together. Common watched his son stroll out casually toward the place where he would resume work on the fence. His hands were in his pockets, his straw hat tilted to the back of his head, not a care in the world. He could have had that fence finished in a matter of hours. Common had seen the boy do amazing things with the proper tools, but he took a certain pride in his work that Common had never seen in anyone else. James would take his time, find immense pleasure in it, and when the job was finished, they would have the finest fence around. James didn't need to walk to the Bloodpines. He already knew everything he could learn on the walk. He didn't have an Abner Burnham to drag him to the top of the watchtower, to make the whole thing worthwhile. James was a loner, would always be a loner. He would be fine without the walk. Lunch came and went, and Rebecca walked out to Common, who was in the tack shed repairing one of the plow harnesses. She was carrying a basket. "He didn't come in for lunch," she said to her husband. Without looking up from his work, Common said, "He knows where the house is. He gets hungry, he'll come." "He won't even notice he's hungry," said Rebecca. "You know how he gets when he's into his work. He's like you. Common stopped working and looked at his wife. His stomach rumbled loudly. I forgot to eat lunch too, didn't I? Really? You gotta make a fuss now? Deal with it. You're an adult, I think. I don't know what cat years are. Rebecca smiled and held out the basket. I packed 2. Can I help you? What is happening here? We're doing serious business. Rebecca's concern was unfounded. Common was still a good way off when he caught a whiff of smoke on the breeze. He stopped at the top of a rise, looking toward a jumble of logs and ropes and rocks, no doubt some contraption James had worked up to assist with the fence. He looked around to find the source of the smell and saw a thin wisp of smoke rising from near the creek. James was sitting beside a small fire, 3 fat fish resting in the coals. James had cleared a bare patch of earth and was scratching into it with a sharpened stick. Common approached silently and saw that James had written a series of numbers and figures that he recognized as some kind of advanced mathematics, but might as well have been witchcraft for all the sense it made to him. Hearing his father, James casually rubbed out his work and turned with a grin. I brought you some lunch, said Common, but it looks like you got that covered. Well, there's plenty, if you want some. James prodded the fish with a forked stick. I don't care much for unseasoned fish, said Common, wondering how on earth the boy had managed to catch the fish in the first place. He had no pole or tackle. Well, I found some wild raspberries. He used the forked stick to hold back the flayed skin on one fish, revealing the raspberries inside, roasting slowly and deliciously, their flavor permeating the white meat of the fish. Common's mouth started to water. Well, in that case. They sat in silence while the fish cooked. Bees floated through the tall grass, and every now and then a field mouse would emerge to examine the enticing smell wafting from the embers. James, said Common, breaking the silence a few minutes later, I wonder if you've given any thought to the Bloodpines. James was prodding the fish, which were nearly ready to eat. Not really. Not this year, anyway. There's no rush. I've got 3 more years. Well, that's true, said Common. Plus, said James, the fence. Common said nothing. If the fence was really the issue, the boy could have had that done in plenty of time to make the walk. There was something else. The boy lifted the fish out of the embers and placed them on a flat rock to cool a bit. Then he took several sticks and started scraping them smooth with a sharp rock. Common wondered what he was doing, but didn't speak. Once he had cleaned off all the bits of bark, James stuck the sticks deep into the embers and began turning them slowly. After about half a minute, the sticks were sooty, but properly hardened. James rubbed the sticks clean on the tail of his shirt, which wasn't much cleaner than the sooty sticks, Common noted, and handed 2 of them to his father. What do I do with these? Common asked his son. James held his own sticks in an awkward grip, like elongated fingers, and showed his father how they could be manipulated as pinchers. Ma showed me. She said she used to eat like this sometimes when she was a girl. Common smiled. She teach you to season fish with wild raspberries, too? James laughed as he slid one of the fish onto a flat piece of bark lined with wide sycamore leaves. You know how she feels about fish. This is just something I figured out on my own. He handed the plate of fish to his father, who accepted it with thanks. It took quite a bit of practice to figure out the special feeding sticks James had given him, but it was well worth the effort. The fish was amazing, the best he'd ever had, which may or may not have been true, but in the moment it felt true. Pa, said James once they had eaten the last of the fish, and the improvised plates and utensils were smoldering in the embers, I don't think I'll be taking the walk to the Bloodpines. Right, said Common. The fence. Not just the fence. I just don't see the point. I mean... James picked up a stick and began scratching idly in the dirt, like before. I understand what it's supposed to mean. It's a journey of self-discovery, he said, quoting the Jubilee speech given every year. The boys go out to the Bloodpines and come back changed for some reason, but I just don't see how walking 100 miles with that lot is supposed to change me other than to sap my patience. Common nodded, but stayed silent. He was surprised at the depth of his son's words, and at the truth in them. It seemed that no one came back from the Bloodpines changed for the better. Not anymore. James continued, I see them every year. They walk right by the farm, right along the old fence. They've all got those silver hatchets hanging from their belts. Last year, I saw Milton Hanley with a gold one, a gold hatchet. Can you imagine a more useless tool? It's all a big show, and it doesn't make a man of anyone. The only people who benefit are the fathers of the boys who get back first, puffing up all proud every time anyone mentions the Bloodpines. The whole thing is one big golden hatchet. It serves no purpose, but it makes everybody feel like they're doing something special. Common stared at his son. The boy had given words to feelings that Common had held for a long time. It made him fiercely proud of his son, who had never needed anyone to tell him what to think or how to feel. All around town were men hoping that their sons would grow to be exactly like them, working hard to make sure they had all the right thoughts and beliefs. The boy Common and Rebecca Lester were raising might have been a changeling, he was so different from either of his parents. "He's the best part of both of us," Rebecca was fond of saying, and Common had to admit that it was true. The boy had his mother's brains and his father's love of hard work, but there was an inventiveness, a cleverness that came from somewhere else, a trait unique to the boy. "I understand," said Common, when James had finished voicing his grievances about the Bloodpines. "But you have to understand that most people don't have your confidence. You come out here to build a fence and you don't bring a lunch or any tools. James, you're not even wearing boots. Folks would call you a fool, and I'd agree with them if I hadn't seen with my own eyes what you can do." "Folks do call me a fool," James pointed out, "but that's because they don't know you. They don't understand you. You don't need to walk 100 miles to look at a bunch of tree stumps to know what you're made of. Some folks do." "Some folks do," James agreed. "So you're not upset with me for not going?" "No, son. I am not one bit upset about the man you're becoming." Common left James to work on the fence. He tried to remember all that his son had said about the walk to the Bloodpines so he could relay it to his wife, but he knew it would come out all wrong. Somehow listening to the boy talk always made his head more clear. He was a better man when James was around, smarter, stronger, and he had to agree with his son. The walk to the Bloodpines wasn't likely to change anyone for the better. Oh, I lost my place. Come back for chapter 4. Yep, 4.